So in this video I'm going to show you how we could use some compound statements and do some more trickier work with Java and decisions. So this is the example program we're going to write together. The first one we're just going to warm up and kind of get hopefully see that you're comfortable with just regular if-else statements. And that's just to decide what the salary of an employee would be given their seniority. So you tell me how many years they've worked for the company, and I can tell you what their base salary is. Then we're going to add this commission structure here, which is going to require us to do some compound decisions, and then I'll show you how we can rewrite that using nested decisions as well. Both work fine, but you may have a preference to see which one you think looks easier. Let's start with the salary then. This might be a good time for you to just pause the video and try writing out this commission structure on your own. So that would be a program where I give you the seniority, you tell me what the salary would be. And then I'll be doing it in NetBeans just in a second here. Okay, so if we flick over to NetBeans then, I've already got a project started. I'm going to end up getting some input here, so let's import the scanner. And I might as well make my scanner since I know I'm going to need it for this program. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is get the amount of seniority from them. So they might tell me they've worked at the company 2.5 years. It might not be an integer that I get, and it's appropriate for them to use a double, so it would be appropriate for us to use a double too. So the seniority is input dot next double, and of course I should probably ask them, to give me their seniority. How many years have you worked for the company? Okay, so now that I have the seniority, I should be able to walk through this table and give out what the salary is going to be. So I'm going to copy and paste this into the code. Oops. And that way, this is a good place to have to put this in my comments, because then if anyone else, it's easy for me to refer to it, and if anyone else is looking over my code, they'll see the structure that I'm using, that presumably this company gave me when I was creating their software. So here's their salary and the years that we're using, and that's what I'm going to do a decisions on. So the first decision is if you've worked for less than or equal to 1 year. So in your first year, you're going to have a base salary of $40,000. So we need a variable to record what the decision that was made. So that means base salary is going to be $40,000. Okay, so the next one is in the second year, and it says they make $42,500. Now the only way that you can get out of this block is if you are greater than 1 year. So I already know that in order to get here, in order to get into this block, you have to be greater than 1 year, otherwise this would have been triggered. So because they're chained together by an else, there's no need to do a compound statement. Your program will run correctly if you say if their seniority is greater than 1 and seniority is less than or equal to 2. This will still run correctly. However, your program's not as efficient because that decision is not needed. The only way that you can get into this block here is if this one failed, and this one only fails when seniority is greater than 1. So I already know that that's true. I can just get rid of it. So their base salary now is $42,500, and we're going to copy and paste some here to save some time, but we can keep going with this salary structure. This time we're looking at 3 years and $46,000, and then we're looking at 4 years and $50,000, and 5 years and $55,000. And again, there's nothing wrong with us doing an else if here and saying the seniority has to be greater than 5, but it's not necessary because the only way that you can get out of this block here is if it was greater than 5. So every other possible case has been done except values greater than 5. So it's not necessary here. We can just make our program run a little faster by saying else. And sometimes, in your comments, it's good to just write here, seniority is greater than 5 at this point. Just to remind yourself that you have checked the logic in the statement. So if you're trying to figure out, where there's an error or a bug, you know that it's not because of the if-else structure you've put in here. And at this point, they make $60,000. So we can tell them now what their base salary is. So why don't we do that? System.out.println, your base salary is, and base salary. So this program now, when we run it, for example, if I've been working at the company maybe for 7 years, I should be on the top scale and get $60,000, which I do. If I'm somewhere in the middle, like maybe I've worked for 3.5 years, then $50,000 gets triggered, which is because I'm less than 4 years but greater than 3. So the program is working the way it should. So at this point, we're going to now go into something a little more challenging, which is to do this commission structure here, which is based on both seniority and how much of a product you've sold. So again, this would probably be a good spot to pause and see if you can translate this, and then I will go and do it in NetBeans with you. One hint I'll give you before you get started is you should read this in English and decide how would you do this if you had to decide. So for example, if someone told me they've been working for 3 years, I know that this is where I go, but that's not very helpful to Java because I haven't really explained exactly how I did it. So remember, when you're putting the instructions into Java, you have to know each step in the process, because if you skip a step, your program won't work. You have to know every step, and you have to be able to explain every step to Java. So the way I would say it is, if you've been working for more than 2 years, but less than or equal to 5, and you sold less than $2,500, your commission rate is 1.25%. So that tells me I have one condition here and another one here. So you'll be doing compound statements to make this work, and that's the approach I'm going to take first, and then I'll show you how we could do this with nested statements as well. Okay, so at this point I'm about to go to NetBeans, so if you want to try it on yourself, you're going to want to pause your video here. Okay, so now let's go and ask them for how much their sales were. So how much were your sales? And we'll get it from them. And again, a double is most appropriate for this choice. So what it's going to allow me to do, I know what their seniority is already from up here, and now I know their sales, so I'm going to be able to tell them what their commission is. So that's the variable I'm going to be making a decision about here. So if they've worked for less than 2 years, and their sales are less than $2,500, then their commission rate here is going to be 1% of what they sold. So their commission is 1% of their sales. Okay, so again, I'm making a decision about the commission. So all the way through this decision, it's about one variable. So I know it needs to be chained together with an else if statement. I only want it to assign the commission once, so that's how I know it needs to be chained together. So this time, what I could do is say the other thing I need to check is if they've been working for 2 years or less and they make over $2,500, they get 2%. So if their sales is greater than or equal to $2,500, then we're going to give them 2%. Okay, so now I've just completed this table here in the commission structure. Okay, so we're going to repeat this process now, and we're going to use a seniority from 2 to 5 this time. So let me put this in. They have to be greater than 2 years, and seniority is less than or equal to 5 years. So in this situation, what I've just found out is the employee is between 2 and 5 years, and their sales are less than $2,500. In that case, they make 1.25% of their sales. And I can finish their column off in the table by saying if their sales are over $2,500, they would make 2.25%. Okay. So the last one that I need to deal with is the final column here, is 5 years or more. So this time, if their seniority is over 5 years, and their sales is under $2,500, they make 1.5% according to the chart that we've used. If they're over 5 years and their sales are greater than or equal to $2,500, then they're going to make 2.5%. So this finishes off the set of decisions that they have. And now I'll have a commission structure built in to the program. So it's probably not a bad idea here to just copy and paste this in. I'll put it in my comments. So this is the structure that we're using. And I know it doesn't seem like we're doing any kind of computer programming here, but very important that you document properly, because if someone else has to edit or review your code, then good comments will help them. It also helps you if you have to go back and figure out where you've made a bug in your code. Okay, so now I've set the commission out of all the possibilities here. And I just want to highlight one error that students sometimes make, and one that I'll be checking when we look over your code. And that's a problem when people forget to close off their decisions. So what I mean is, if I had done this, Java's not going to give me any warnings, but there is a problem. And that problem is that if I'm less than 2 years seniority, or equal to 2 years seniority, but I made exactly $2,500, then all of a sudden I don't have any commission assigned, because the programmer forgot to include all possibilities in here. So be careful about how you decide to use your inequalities. Make sure that you've covered the entire spectrum of possibilities. For example, I've used less than or equal to 2. That's how I knew this time I'm going to do greater than 2. Because I don't want, if for example I did greater than or equal to 2, there's two cases now. If I had 2 years seniority, it's going to go to this decision here first. So if I made over $2,500, that's where I'm going to go. But if I made under $2,500 and I had 2 years seniority, it would go to this one. So, and anyways, again, there's a little bit more happening because we have such a chain of statements, but you should pay attention to how you're using your inequalities and make sure that they only happen where you mean for them to. So now I've covered all of the possible seniorities, and I've covered all of the possible sales amounts, so I know what their commission is. So let's tell them what their commission would be here. So your commission is, and it's probably a good idea. Okay, we'll deal with that problem in a second here, but it's probably a good idea to tell them what their total is. And remember, when you do the plus sign with strings, you actually have to bracket them in this case in order to make the arithmetic happen first, because otherwise when it goes from left to right, you have a string plus a number, so it would give me just string concatenation and no math would happen. So the error here is saying there might be a problem in my code because I might not have assigned a value to commission. So I know that I've covered all possibilities in here. So if I'm confident that I know I've included my logic, then that my logic is okay, then I really only need an else statement here. What I can say in this code is this must be true because it's the only other possibility at this point. So if they made anything that they did that was less than or equal to 5 years seniority would be somewhere in here. So that means they have to have greater than or equal to 5 years seniority, and their sales has to be less than 2,500 to be in this block. So the only way that I get down to this statement is when their seniority is greater than is when their sales are greater than or equal to $2,500 and their seniority is greater than or equal to 5. So we can just leave it as an else statement. We could also prune some more of this stuff out, but again, I wanted to practice doing compound statements with you, and I'll show you some other tricks we could do to prune some of this code down and look at it with nested statements as well. But now that I've done that, Java's happy because it knows exactly one of these is going to be executed, and commission will then be assigned a value. If you're not confident about that, then you'd have to give it some default value. So you'd have to go like this and give it a default, like you make no commission unless you get triggered somewhere in here. And now Java's happy because you did assign a value, even though it may not. Well, from Java's point of view, it may not be assigned a value in here. So now in this program, let's run it here, and let's say I've worked for the company for 4 years, and my sales were $2,000. So I made $25 in commissions and $50,000, $50,025 for my total salary. So I suppose they'd probably be making more than this $2,500 in sales, especially, it's probably over a year. But anyway, for the purposes of us practicing with Java, it's fine because we're just working on the compound decisions. So let's talk some more about how we could tidy this up and make the decisions a little easier to deal with. So the first thing that comes to mind when I do this is I'm seeing that I've got the seniority as the beginning here. It's the same condition. I haven't changed that seniority in either statement, and it's the sales that I've done differently. So I've had some practice at this, obviously, but that tells me I can just use a nested decision in here to help me get the structure that I'm looking for. So let me show you how that would work. So what I'm going to do is here I could say I'm going to take this decision out. I'm going to say if your seniority was less than or equal to 2 years, then you get to go in this block. And now I'm going to deal with all the sales possibilities. So if your sales was less than $2,500, then there's your commission. So the only way you get into this block is if you're less than or equal to 2 years, and then the only way you get into this block is if your sales was less than or equal to 25. So now that I know this, the only other possibility in our example is that your sales were over $2,500. So I can say else, and again, you might want to make a comment to yourself. Sales are over $2,500. So now I know that their commission is 1.25%. Sorry, 2%. So now I've dealt with everybody who has 2 years of seniority. Okay, then I don't need this anymore because I have the case where they make over $2,500. It's in this nested statement. So right now the way the logic flows is how much seniority do they have. If it's less than or equal to 2 years, then we make one decision about what their sales would be. So I like this approach a lot better. It's cleaner to me and it looks a little easier to follow. I'm going to use the same idea now when I do the next statement. Because the seniority here is between 2 and 5 in both cases, the only thing I'm changing is the sales. So again, it tells me that I can probably end up doing this instead and nest this statement. So we'll work out what their commission would be. So if their sales is less than $2,500, then their commission is going to be 1.25. But otherwise, anybody with between 2 and 5 years seniority, they make a commission of 2.25%. And now I've covered all the cases for seniority between 2 and 5 years. So we'll go down here then and take a look at someone who's got more than 5 years seniority. So if you have more than 5 years seniority, again, I'm using the same condition here as well as there. So I'm going to use just a single statement. So otherwise, if your seniority was over 5 years, and now I'm going to make a statement here about the sales. And now I can decide what their commission should be based on working over 5 years of seniority. And I make 2.5%. So I no longer need this, because if you've made over 5 years seniority, then you're going to be triggered in this block. So this is one way we can tidy it up using nested decisions, and I think you'll probably, for most case, people prefer to do this rather than, big messy compounded statements. Both are equivalent, so both will work correctly. There is some efficiency though to be gained by doing it this way, because you'll notice I no longer have else if blocks, I just have else blocks, so some of the decision has been tidied up. I can even tidy this up further using some of those decisions that have already happened. So one more thing I could do is, I know that the seniority is less than or equal to 2 here. That means the only way that it wasn't triggered is I'm greater than 2 years. So I don't need to check that, right? I can remove this again like we did before and say, well, the only thing I'm interested now is if you're under 5 years, because you must be over 2 years. So somewhere between 2 and 5 years here. Okay, so my comment might look something like that, just to remind myself that's my assumption, that's what I've checked in the logic, so that way if I'm looking for a bug, I know what I was doing when I removed that extra condition. So again, we can also use it one more time. The only way that you're not going to go into this block is if you are greater than 5 years seniority, which is what I'm checking here. So there is no need to double check this. I can just remove that, because I know at this point you must be over 5 years, or it would have been triggered in this block here or the previous block. So at this point I've cut out a couple more and I've made my code even that much more efficient, but I've had to do it using nested statements. So hopefully, for me, I like this approach a lot better. You'll also notice that I don't need to give it a default value. Java can follow through my logic, and it knows that one of these branches is going to be executed, and it's going to do it a lot quicker than where we started, because it only makes one decision about the seniority and then one decision about the sales, and it's done. Whereas before, it may possibly go through a lot more with those compound statements. So this program, we can just run it again to show you its equivalent. Last time I'd worked for 4 years and I made $2,000 in sales, so it's the same rate that we had before, but again, an alternative way of writing your logic statements. Okay, so again, this is probably where you should feel like you're going to be at the end of our unit on decisions, and if you have any questions, then feel free to ask.